Our first two witnesses today are Louise and Trevor, are they?
Yes, sir.
Louise and Trevor, please.
Please state your full name.
Louise Marsden.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please state your full name.
Trevor William Marsden.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Trevor, you have haemophilia B,
Yes,
and that's a blood clotting disorder with a deficiency of factor 9.
correct, yes.
Up until you were 18 years old, your haemophilia treatment was under the care of Dr. Jones at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast.
That's correct, yes.
And then from the age of 18, responsibility for your treatment transferred to Dr. Elizabeth Main, still at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast.
That's correct, yes.
Prior to you receiving factor 9 products in the mid-1970s onwards, how was your haemophilia treated when you were a child and teenager?
Well, living on the farm, it was treated by, if I got hurt on the farm, I went straight to, my mum took me straight to the hospital and I was treated there. And that was the Royal Victoria Hospital.
And you didn't require treatment on a regular basis. It would be when you injured yourself working in a very physically active way on the family farm.
That's correct, yes.
Your medical records show that certainly by 1975 you were receiving factor 9 products.
I was getting hurt a lot, yes, on the farm.
And there are records which you've exhibited to your witness statement which show that you had an ankle injury in 1976 and you went to the hospital for treatment and you were given factor 9 products in 1976 and 1977.
That's correct.
Louise, you've referred in your statement to Trevor having become jaundiced in around 1976. What do you know about that?
What I had been told was that following Trevor's treatment for the sprained ankle, where he first received factor 9, he then was diagnosed with having jaundice and he was transferred from the Royal Victoria Hospital to Perrysburn Fever Hospital and was treated there for jaundice.
Trevor, were you given any warnings or advice or information about there being any risks of infection associated with the factor 9 products?
Absolutely not.
And as far as you were aware, were you ever given any choice about which treatment to receive?
No.
Can I ask you both, and whichever of you wants to, please do feel free to answer this, about a meeting that was called by Dr. Main in the 1980s to talk about HIV. Louise, in your second statement, you thought it might have been 1983, but I think you now think it's more likely to have been 1985.
Yes, I do believe that it was the meeting in 1985. Trevor and I both attended the meeting. It took place very bizarrely. I'm going to call it a lecture theatre in the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. Dr. Elizabeth Main took the meeting, and it was basically a meeting to give haemophiliacs and their spouses information regarding what was very topical, HIV, stroke AIDS. Trevor and I both attended. I remember very vividly having to sit on desks. It was a bit dishevelled. We were told that all of the haemophiliacs would be tested for HIV. That was a given. We weren't asked. I'm quite sure and certain in my recollection we were told. Dr. Main stated that the choice that the haemophiliacs would have would be whether or not they wanted to know the result of the tests. And she said she would ask everyone individually. And that's exactly what happened. She went round the room. Trevor was sitting as we are, and she asked Trevor, did he want to know? Her secretary recorded what people said, and Trevor said, no, he did not want to know the result of his test. She then passed over me to the next gentleman to my left, and I view this in my mind's eye. I have a very vivid recollection of it. I then put my hand up and said, a bit like Oliver, I have a problem. I want to know. I said, why would you not want to know? I said, Trevor and I have 2 children. At the time, our eldest was 3 and the other girl was 18 months. And I said, I want to know. And one of the reasons why my recollection is very vivid, because I ruminated about it on the way home in the car, even though I was known to Dr. Main, she turned to her secretary and said, put that down. Trevor doesn't want to know, but Mrs. Marsden wants to know. And to me, it was the touch of sarcasm because she referred to me as Mrs. Marsden rather than Louise.
In your statements, Louise, you've described how the meeting, in a sense, fell into 2 halves. There was an introductory part from Dr. Main, and then there was a point at which Dr. Main left the room.
Correct.
And the haemophiliac patients and their relatives who were in the room then discussed, or there was some form of discussion about matters. And then Dr. Main came back in, and it was at that point when she came back in that the questions were asked of individuals. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Just one point of detail, because as you know, I think it came up in evidence that was heard in Belfast. Your recollection is that the doors to the room were not locked.
No, they weren't.
They were definitely not locked.
No.
I'll just, if I may, because we have a witness statement from Dr. Main in response to your statements. I'll come back to some of what she says at a later stage of your evidence. But in relation to the particular issue of the meeting, Dr. Main says this: HIV testing was offered to all those who had been in receipt of blood factor concentrates. And then she refers to something in your evidence about her having said she was erring on the side of caution. And Dr. Main says this: the witness is correct because in carrying out such widespread testing, it probably was erring on the side of caution. However, at the time of actually testing, the patient was invited to give consent, and if they had any difficulty in doing it, the test was easily postponed until a future date or not carried out at all in accordance with the patient's wishes. Several patients postponed testing, but none refused. It seemed only right and proper that they should be given the opportunity to know or not know the results. One of the secretaries took a note of the names of patients who did not wish to know the result. The witness's husband, so it's referring to your statement there, Louise, you're the witness she's referring to, decided that he did not want to be tested at the time and he did not wish to know the result. This was noted. Then the witness herself, you, Louise, requested to be given the result. Her husband looked surprised, and I think possibly I raised my eyebrows. That's Dr. Main's account. In terms of the actual test that was then later carried out, Trevor, can you recall any further discussion when you actually went and had the test for HIV, or or anything about the testing?
No, I don't remember anything about, say, filling in a form or somebody asking me. It was just a routine thing. I went to get my bloods taken when I was called up, and that was it. So I take it was just they took bloods and did it then.
And then how was it that you both came to learn the result of the HIV test?
Right.
It was a letter addressed to Trevor, and in it the letter said, and I am paraphrasing, basically, as per your instructions, I am writing because your wife wanted to know and you didn't want to know, and informed us that, thank goodness, Trevor was HIV negative.
Now, that was, we think, 1985. You were told you were HIV negative. Was anything said to you at the time or in the years that followed about any risk relating to hepatitis?
Absolutely not to me at all. And what's your recollection, Trevor?
No, absolutely not, no.
Trevor, you began in the 1980s into the early 90s to experience severe fatigue. You'd been a very, very physically active person all your life working on the farm, but you began to notice that you were very easily tired.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
But it was in 1996 that you attended a hospital appointment with Dr. Main and possibly Dr. McNulty present.
That's correct, yeah.
And you were given information about hepatitis C. What can you recall about that, Trevor?
At that meeting, Dr. McNulty obviously was present. Dr. Main said that it's apparent that you've got hepatitis C, and obviously I'm always in a hurry to get back to the farm and really wasn't taking a lot in, and she went on about maybe how to take precautions with Louise. That was sexually, with using condoms and things like that, and I then was dismissed, went home, and actually on the way home I called to see my grandparents, and I was in a bit of shock, and then rang Louise. Can't even remember what I said to you. What did I say to you?
You told me that you'd got an infection.
Yeah.
And you didn't really know what it was.
Yeah.
That your head was, use a good Northern Ireland term, you might have to put a glossary up for us, melted.
Yeah.
And that he said, I had to stop at my granny's for a cup of tea. He said, my head, I can't take this in, my head's melted. I was working at the time, so that's why he telephoned me. I wasn't at home.
And
sorry, I didn't understand what hepatitis C was at all.
And you both said in your statements, you, Trevor, based upon being at this consultation, you, Louise, based upon Trevor talking to you about it afterwards, that there was very little information or practical advice about risks of infection or any discussion about the likely progression of the disease with you at that time, at that initial meeting?
Absolutely none. No. My source of information was to go on to dial up the internet, as it was then, and the only information I could access, and it was very limited, was from the British Liver Foundation.
And what did you find out, and what was your reaction?
Basically, I remember reading, it was 1 or 2 paragraphs, which was doom and gloom. Hepatitis C leads liver disease, eventually leads to scarring of the liver and cirrhosis, and ultimately death. And that was it. We were not given any leaflets, although, and it is in the statements, we subsequently had conversations with Dr. Main. I would emphasise we were not specifically invited in for a meeting with Dr. Main or any other clinicians to discuss the diagnosis, the prognosis, and the implications for us and our children.
Now, we can date, we think, the meeting by reference to documents in Trevor's medical records, and we're going to have a look at a small number of the records on the screens in front of you. Paul, can I have up, please, 1372005? And could we go to the next page, please? Thank you. So if we could have highlighted, if we go to the bottom of the page, we can see some dates. Report date, 26th of March 1996. And then on the right-hand side, we've got specimen date, 23rd of October 1995, received 23rd of October 1995. That seems to suggest blood taken from you in October 1995, the test result being reported a number of months later on the 26th of March 1996. And then if we look at the result itself in the middle of that page, hepatitis C virus RNA positive, and then we see hepatitis C virus genotype 3A identified. So there's a positive test result in March 1996 in your records. If we then have up on screen, please, Paul, 1372008. Can we go to the next page, please? So we can see the date at the top of the page. It's not particularly clear, but it's certainly March 1996. It looks like the date's been written over. And then if we go to the body of the reason for attending, was buffing metal 3 days ago, not wearing protective glasses, and got a speck of metal in right eye. So it would seem that you've attended this appointment, not specifically for anything relating to any underlying test results, but because you'd had an injury.
That's correct.
And it talks about the metal speck being removed without any problem. And then it says this, also held discussion re HCV positivity, explained re historical aspect, and then there's reference to subtypes, PCR, and then a reference to LFTs, liver function tests. So this is the first reference in your medical records to any discussion with you about hepatitis C.
Yes.
And that's consistent with your recollection that you were told for the first time in 1996.
Yes.
And then if we have the previous page of that exhibit, please, Paul. We can see 20th of May 1996, so 2 months later. Reason for attending, attended for discussion with Dr. Main re HCV, wife unable to attend. Louise, I think you had an observation about wife unable to attend.
Yeah.
I do. For the first time ever, Trevor received a letter asking him to come for a review appointment. In it actually, Dr. Main states that you hadn't seen him for quite a while. And we commented to each other on it that this is a new thing they're doing. And Trevor attended on his own. Now, I would take you back to the previous document where it says that Trevor, having attended for metal in his eye, the positivity, HCV, was discussed with him. And that is not Trevor's recollection. Just to be totally clear here, Trevor didn't come home from having had the examination as a result of the metal in his eye to tell me he had hepatitis C. If it was discussed with him, it did not register with him at all. This is the meeting from which Trevor was in such shock he had to go to his granny's.
That's correct.
So, had I known that this was a very, very important meeting in the life of the Marsden family, I would have been there. I would never have let Trevor attend on his own.
Thank you. And then we'll just look at the rest of the note, which says, Trevor was reassured that although he had been HCV positive for probably in plus 20 years, his ALT, etc. had remained stable and he was not at present progressing to chronic liver disease. No need for interferon yet, but to have, I'm not entirely sure what the next...
ultrasound, etc.
Ultrasound, etc., and complete range of blood taken. And then there's further reference to a plan. That is, I think, consistent with your recollection that when you were first told, Trevor, you were told you'd had it for years.
Yeah.
But you didn't realise until that point that you had had this condition for years. There's one further document that we should look at, and that, please, Paul, is 1372003. This is a document from 1991. We can see the date there, 18th of January 1991. And if we go down towards the bottom of the page, please, there's an RV review 1 year, and then we have a number of things written down, some of them crossed out. So we have next appointment needs HB antigen written there, underlined. Underneath that are the words Hep C crossed out, LFTs underlined, letter for family tree inhibitor. Above the words next appointment, we see the words anti-Hep C, and then we see across from that also crossed out serum in lab which will be tested. Now, you don't, I think, know why things have been crossed out on this page.
That's correct.
But this is a reference in 1991 in Trevor's records to hepatitis C. As I understand your recollections and your evidence, this was not something that was ever discussed with you or drawn to your attention in 1991.
No.
Never.
Never.
You haven't been able to find in Trevor's medical records any test results in relation to hepatitis C from 1991.
No, that's correct.
So you don't know what happened as a result of this document, if anything.
Correct.
We should just before I go back to Dr. Main's statement, in 1996, when you were finally told that you had hepatitis C, had you been made aware that you were being tested for hepatitis C?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Now, again, we have a detailed statement from Dr. Main, and so obviously this will be disclosed to core participants and published on the inquiry website in accordance with normal procedures. But I'm just going to read out a small number of paragraphs, both in fairness to Dr. Main, but also to give you the opportunity to comment if you wish to on them. So Dr. Main says this in her statement. She says that the patient, that's you, Trevor, developed clinical jaundice in the 1970s. And she refers, as you've said, Louise, to Trevor being transferred to what was called the fever hospital at that time. It says that your blood was tested for all known causes of jaundice, but results were negative. But the virology laboratory, as was their practice, kept an aliquot of the patient's serum to be retested in the future when other infections might be discovered or might evolve. Pausing there, were you aware that a sample of your blood had been kept in the virology laboratory from the 1970s for possible testing in the future?
No, I didn't know that, no.
Dr. Main continues as follows. The hepatitis C virus became isolated in 1991. Tests became available to detect HCV antibody around that time, but tests for active HCV infection were not available until 1993. As far as I can recall, I believe that the original 1976 sample was retested in 1991. In 1991, a further sample was taken and tested, and a further sample was taken and tested in 1993, making 3 tests in all. Were you aware of any testing for hepatitis C going on in 91 or 93?
No.
And then she says the customary length of time elapsed between testing and results becoming available. Patients were seen as soon as possible after their results were received for consultation and discussion. You weren't, as I understand your recollection, seen at any point in 1991 or 1993 or at any time until 1996 for any discussion about hepatitis C.
That's correct.
That's correct.
And then she says this: present-day practice would require oral or written permission to carry out viral blood tests. At the time in question, locally, nationally and internationally, expediency seemed paramount and specific consent was often not obtained. And then she contrasts that with the situation relating to HIV, where she says tests were not carried out without consent. Now, Dr. Main then addresses what you've said in your statements about the consultation in 1996, Trevor, when you were told about hepatitis C. And she says this: Dr. Orla McNulty and a member of the nursing staff and myself met with the patient. We sat together and chatted for almost an hour about the jaundice. It was pointed out to the witness that he'd survived for 30 years feeling fairly well and that his liver function tests were good. We were unable to predict his future, which may have been the aspect of the meeting which en route home may have caused the patient great anxiety. He may have forgotten, but it was suggested at the time if he had any further questions or worries, he could contact the centre and make a further appointment. He also could make contact with the centre's social worker. Do you have any observations in relation to that part of Dr. Main's evidence?
I don't recall the jaundice. I don't recall because the jaundice was something that I had when I was in the fever hospital, and that was gone. I think I was maybe 16 at the time. I mean, that was a way back. I can't even remember why she would bring that up. But no, I don't know why she did that.
And then she continues as follows in relation to 1991 test. She says this: the test in 1991 demonstrated that the witness had met the hepatitis C virus at some time. It showed that he had antibody but not active infection at the time of testing. He was clinically well, therefore he was not informed about this particular result. It was thought it might cause undue anxiety and worry. At that time, it was unclear what the future would hold for someone with such a result. So again, pausing there, Dr. Main's evidence suggests there was a test that was actually completed in 1991. It showed you had, in her words, met the hepatitis C virus, but because you were clinically well, there wasn't active infection, and to avoid worrying you, you weren't told.
Well, I think a lot of people that would know Dr. Main, anytime as to answer your question earlier when she said, if there was anything you wanted to ask for information, I did ask a lot of awkward questions, and so did my wife, but it was a case of, it'll be okay, it's nothing for you to worry about, and anybody that knows Dr. Main knows that's what she was like, and it was very hard to get information out.
Louise, you want to say something?
This makes me very, very angry. This is one of the things that I have great difficulty, and it's the date, 1991. Bearing in mind, Trevor wasn't told until 1996. So, Trevor wanted a football team, but his first wife only gave him 4, and his second wife will have to give him the rest. But in 1991, in 1992, we had our son, Sam.
Yeah.
And what angers me is, and I know, having been tested, I was not positive with hepatitis C.
Yeah. We asked the question, Louise.
Sam was born in 1992.
Yeah.
She knew in 1991, definitively, from the records. Yeah. I could have been positive, and I could have passed that on to our son.
Sorry, can I go back? It was we had a discussion with Dr. Main. I was with my wife. I got very worried about this, obviously.
That wasn't in 1991.
No. Okay. But we did ask the question, could it be passed on to our children?
And that, I think, from your statement, Louise, was probably 1997.
Yes.
That's when
correct.
you were tested.
Yes.
Correct.
And your result was, as you say, negative. But that was some 6 years after the events that Dr. Main has just described.
That is correct.
And then Dr. Main's statement continues. By 1993, a test became available which could detect active hepatitis C infection. It took time before the test came into routine use. The witness's definitive result of active infection was obtained in March 1996 and confirmed in August 1996. It was now felt important that he should know the findings, hence the invitation to come and meet with the staff.
Yes.
So again, that would appear to confirm your recollection that you knew nothing of any of this until 1996.
That is correct. And I would emphasise it was for Trevor, his recollection of being told is May of 96.
And just finally, in relation to this issue and Dr. Main's evidence, she refers in her statement and has referred in earlier statements to a weekend, a residential weekend that took place in Enniskillen in 1995, where there was a meeting for patients and centre staff, fully sponsored by 9 international pharmaceutical companies. She says a number of experts, both virologists and haemophilia doctors, came from England and Scotland to address the conference and make themselves available to individuals. And as I understand it, Trevor, you were in fact at that weekend.
Yeah, I was there. I took the 3 girls along, and there was activities for the children. Louise looked after the farm when I went down. I actually spent the weekend there. This is very bizarre, with my mother-in-law in a cabin, very small. Anyway, but the idea was that she would look after the children, and I obviously was looking for information to my condition, and that was kind of hard because nobody wanted to talk about it.
But in 1995, so the residential weekend described by Dr. Main is in 1995.
Yes,
And it's pre him being told
So,
it's stagnant.
but you didn't actually know you yourself were infected until 1996.
No.
Correct. So Dr. Main is saying in her statement that Trevor should have attended, which he did, and taken the opportunity to educate himself and become more informed and empowered. But in 1995, Trevor didn't know, so he didn't see the relevance of maybe being more proactive. And I would also comment on the fact that the event was sponsored by, I think you said, 9 pharmaceutical companies.
That's what Dr. Main's statement says. And it's right, I should say, it's a detailed statement. There is more in the statement than I have read out, but those were the particular points I wanted to ask you to comment on. The full statement, as a matter of fairness to Dr. Main, will be published on the inquiry website. Louise, you recall then, as I say, I think in 1997, a consultation at which you attended.
Before we leave 1996, at the moment we have 3 dates coming from different sources as to the time that you, Trevor, were told that you had active hepatitis C. That's March, May and August, from what Dr. Main has said. Can we go back to the March, which I think is 008? It's the one we had before that. I think it was...
This is the March document, and then the...
Yes, if we go down on that. Stop there. According to the note describing a discussion about hepatitis C positivity, explain, read the historical aspect, whatever that might mean, subtypes, PCR, and then potential prescriptions. Yet potential prescriptions was what was on the note as well in May. We look at that, which is the next page, I think. That's it. You scroll down. Looks very similar handwriting. But let's scroll down to that, and then the no need for interferon yet.
If we keep going.
So, for some reason, there seems to be a description of the same conversation, but two different dates ascribed to it.
So yes, and maybe we need to ask Dr. Main more questions in due course about these facts. The potential P in the March 96 may be potential prognosis.
I think it's prescriptions normally.
But there is no other reference other than no need for interferon yet to treatment.
Yes, so there remains a mystery, and Dr. Main says nothing about those two dates.
No. So,
but you, so far as you're concerned, you were spoken to only once.
Yes, that's correct.
To tell you about that, and that was the time you had to stop for a wee cup of tea at your grandma's.
Yeah, that's correct.
Louise, you then recall a consultation which you attended in 1997, and you yourself were tested in 1997. What can you recall about that?
Dr. Main was present. She describes it very well in her statement, and again I am paraphrasing, but she talked about how clever the hepatitis C virus was, and she likened it to a drop of blood, 2 drops of blood on a work surface, 1 HIV, and bleach or wiping it away would do away with any risk of infection. But the hepatitis C was a more cleverer virus, and that if you wiped the work surface with bleach or wiped it away, that wouldn't necessarily kill the virus. Yeah. She told me that there was no risk of the virus being sexually transferred from Trevor to me. And she then tested me, which seems a bit of a contradiction. Subsequent to that, I found out from another source. We actually attended a conference in Southern Ireland, which they were obviously in the build-up to the whole Lindsay inquiry. And I found out more information there than I did from the clinicians in Northern Ireland. One of the other things I found out was that, even though I'd asked Dr. Main, all of our girls, we have 3 girls, and they should all have their factor 9 levels tested. But Dr. Main was very dismissive. Yeah. She's very conservative with the information. I'm not saying that she lied to us, but she certainly limited what she told us. In relation to the effect that all of this had on our relationship as a couple and the consequence of the first treatment that Trevor had, do you want me to speak?
I'll come on to that in a few minutes, if I may.
Yeah, that's fine.
But just before we leave the question of how Trevor was informed and what information was or wasn't given, you've described in your statement, Louise, 2 meetings at which you were present. You've described a consultation with Dr. Main in which you say you asked questions to which she provided no answers. She stated what I was asking for was more information than I needed to know and I shouldn't worry about it. And that's where the offer to test you for hepatitis C was discussed.
Correct.
And then you've described a separate meeting facilitated by the Haemophilia Society in paragraph 25 of your statement, which Dr. Main attended, and that you've said that was the meeting at which she used this comparison between hepatitis and HIV. We will obviously come back to and talk about the impact of the diagnosis, both physically and more generally. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you both about the issues relating to VCJD notification.
Oh.
So, in 2001, Trevor received a letter, and we'll look at that. It's 1372009. It's a letter of the 12th of February 2001. We just go down the page a little, please. Ooh, we will see it says, I'm writing to confirm that you were not exposed to any of the affected batches in question. So this is February 2001, letter from Dr. Julia Anderson to you, saying you weren't exposed. If we go to the next page, please, Paul. We can see there was a fact sheet that was enclosed with that, and if we look at paragraph 7, it says there may be further notifications in the future if other patients with VCJD have been blood donors.
Yeah, I got that letter, yes.
And you then got a further notification in 2004.
Yeah.
And we'll look at that. It's the next document, please, Paul. It's the next page in this exhibit. We see a letter, that's to doctor letter, 22nd of September 2004. But we'll go to, if we go on 2 pages, please, Paul, to a letter dated the 20th of September 2004. That's it. This is the letter that was sent by Dr. Frank Jones, consultant haematologist, to you, Trevor, on the 20th of September 2004. It refers to haemophilia directors having been asked by the Departments of Health to send a letter and information to all patients with bleeding disorders currently registered at their centre. And it refers to public health measures to protect people from what was described as the very small risk of developing VCJD through blood or or organ donations. And then it says this, as you will see from the enclosed, we are offering to see any of our patients or their parents who wish to discuss their own situation, including whether or not they received any such batches. And Trevor, you completed a form. If we go on 2 pages, please, Paul. You completed a form to say that you wanted to know that you were on the right form. It's the next page. That's it. You would like to know if you received an implicated batch. That was the 26th of September 2004.
That's correct, yes.
And then if we just go 1 page before that, please, Paul, to a letter of the 5th of October 2004, we can see there that Dr. Jones has received your reply slip and says, I understand you wish to know in writing whether you've received an implicated batch. Please understand this may take some time, as not only haemophilia patients are involved in this look-back exercise. Please be patient with us. As you will understand, we've received no additional assistance to carry out this task. Now, those are the documents relating to VCJD in your medical records. What happened next? Louise, I think you and Trevor both have a recollection of a meeting you attended.
We did, yes, to Birmingham.
We were invited to go to Birmingham to a meeting on the back of this. It was facilitated in terms of the expenses by the Haemophilia Society, and we actually remarked on the fact that it was being funded, that we were having all of our expenses paid. It was just in the morning and out in the evening. So we went. Trevor's a very gregarious person. By the time I had caught up with Trevor, he practically knew everyone who was at the table. We were sitting in very small round tables, and there were 2 clinicians present at the table.
That's when I got worried.
And these very well attired gentlemen came in and sat down at what I will describe as a long top table, and they informed us that they had been tasked, in other words, they were a quango. They had been tasked by the government to look into this issue of people receiving blood products from donors or other sources in relation to variant CJD, and that the reason why we, the attendees, had been asked to the meeting was to inform us that Trevor was indeed a recipient of products that had been donated by donors who had been identified as having been had died of variant CJD.
So there were other patients there
Yeah,
beside Trevor,
that's correct.
and you were informed in a group that you had received implicated batches.
Exactly,
Correct.
that's correct.
And you've said, Louise, in your statement, it was very similar to the meeting regarding HIV, this
Yeah.
group meeting.
That's
It
correct,
was,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
It was like Groundhog Day.
And you, Louise, stood up and spoke, you say in your
Yes, I did,
statement.
yeah.
What did you say?
I did. I, again, said that the elephant in the room was the anger. That the infected and the affected, once again, using one of Trevor's terms, just when you thought it was safe to get out of the bath, you know, they had given you something else.
Yeah.
And,
I felt there was a red dot on me. They were out to get me.
yeah, it was
Terrible.
It was bizarre. That's the best way I can describe it. And subsequent to that meeting,
Yeah.
we have heard absolutely
Nobody.
Nothing.
Nobody has come back.
nobody offered us one-to-one counselling. It was just, we're giving you this information and we're being employed by the government, no doubt, pardon my cynicism, getting lots and lots of money. I don't know what those people and the royal gentlemen at the top table were doing or are doing, but we were given absolutely no practical help or assistance
No.
of any kind.
And you've said in your statements that there has been no follow-up since then.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And you've received no further information whatsoever in relation to variant CJD.
That is correct.
We did research it, I mean, at the time, but it's, no.
And Trevor, you've said in your statement that you live in fear
Yeah,
that variant CJD may surface.
yeah, that's correct.
And one of your daughters, Nicola, in her statement, describes this information, the potential or the exposure to the risk of VCJD, as almost the last straw. She says it's something constantly at the back of her mind as well.
Exactly, yeah.
You have discovered recently, I understand, when your solicitors looked at your medical records, Trevor, for the purpose of assisting you in preparing your statement for the inquiry, that there are positive test results in 1996 for CMV and parvovirus.
That's
Is that
correct.
right?
Yeah.
And you were not told in 1996, as I understand your statement, either that those tests were being carried out or what the results were.
That's correct.
And you saw it for the first time when your solicitors drew it to your attention.
That's correct here, yeah.
Going back then to the hepatitis C, you embarked upon a course of treatment with interferon.
That's correct, yeah.
Can I ask you to describe, Trevor or Louise, either of you, whoever wishes to answer, what the impact was physically and mentally of both the hepatitis C and the interferon treatment?
Me?
Well, can I say it was... The answer.
It was absolutely carnage. After Trevor was told, and I'm going to put a bit of background to this, Trevor's relationship with Dr. Main was one of absolute trust. I'm not saying there were 3 in our marriage, but it was intrinsic. His belief in her judgment that no matter what happened, he would use the phrase, just get me to the hospital, Dr. Main will sort me out. He had absolute faith in Dr. Main. And being fair to Dr. Main, if she was on your side, she was on your side.
Yeah, she fought very hard.
I married Action Man. Trevor rode horses. He worked on a farm, one of the most dangerous occupations you can have. He rode motorbikes and he raced motorbikes. And he wanted to live his life just like any other person. I don't know whether the haemophilia gene comes with the lunatic gene, but that was Trevor. When he wanted to race, Dr. Main fully supported him. She helped him get his racing licence, and he did indeed, for a short time, race motorbikes. Jumping a bit and taking you back to 85, sliding door moment in the Marsden household. When that happened, the governing body that oversaw motorcycle racing, in getting your licence, you had to get a medical. And the doctor at the time affiliated with them, Dr. Sam Tanner, decided that Trevor was a risk. He was a risk to himself, and he was a risk to other motorcyclists, even though it was safer. They were all going the one way on a track or the roads. And we took the conscious decision for Trevor to abandon that, because in trying to pursue what he wanted to do, he had to out himself as a haemophiliac. Although he was HIV negative, he did not tell anyone he was a haemophiliac post-1985. We were frightened, and I don't use that term lightly, to discuss it with anyone.
You don't tell people.
We told our children not to disclose that, which is very, very hard. All of a sudden, it's a light switch. You've had the norm where it wasn't an issue. Daddy was a haemophiliac, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, Secret Service, don't mention it to anybody.
Safest people to talk to were the cows.
So, Trevor then was faced with being diagnosed with hepatitis C. He struggled. He thought that Dr. Main would ring him up and tell him, this has all been a mistake, Trevor. We've mixed your results up with someone else. Emotionally, it was a roller coaster. It was a white knuckle ride. And we were up and down, and I use that genuinely we, because although Trevor is infected and was experiencing it, so did everyone in the house. The children, myself. What didn't help was Trevor did not want to share this with anyone else or the rest of his family. So again, as a family unit, we are trying to keep a lid on it. The children are seeing things happening. I'm trying to explain that to them, but not give them too much information so it wouldn't leak out. Secret Service. So upon Trevor's diagnosis, as a couple, we struggled. I wanted to be pragmatic and the realist. This is what the diagnosis is. We need to move on. Trevor couldn't come to terms with it. We argued. We fought. We didn't throw things, but it was very, very volatile. And I do think that there's a direct correlation between Trevor. I've sat through a number of witnesses giving their statements, and I am convinced that the reason the information was disclosed in 1996 was because the interferon and the ribavirin became available in 97, and they needed people to clinically trial test it, and who better than the closed group of haemophiliacs whom they had all the medical records for, who were like lambs to the slaughter, compliant was the word Susan used yesterday. I couldn't get a more apt word. So when Trevor went on to the first course of treatment and he had a start-stop, he started it initially and the side effects were so traumatic, he stopped. He then had to go back and they, again, I don't use this word lightly, threatened him that if he stopped the treatment again, he wouldn't get another chance to have the treatment.
Said it was so expensive.
So the day Trevor rocked up to the hospital and got his little EpiPen on his own, came home, they've showed me how to do this. It's just like injecting yourself with insulin, blah-de-blah, and I take it, and I have to do it every other day. He took the first injection. He started to feel unwell. Trevor's cure for everything is a warm bath. He got into the bath. He couldn't get out of the bath. To put it in perspective, we have 4 children at this stage. Sam is 5, Rachel is 10, Lucy is 13, and Nicola is 15. He's not the heaviest person in the world, but I couldn't get him out of the bath. He didn't want the 2 older girls coming into the bathroom to help him. He had the worst side effects. If you look at what comes with the treatment, and it says in a very few cases, Trevor had all of those.
They call it
He had rigors.
Yeah.
To me, it was like an epileptic fit. I got him into the bed. I got the children to get their hot water bottles. We packed him with hot water bottles around him, extra duvet. He just was like this, shaking.
Yeah.
I rang Ward 22. That was his ward at the hospital. I told them, I don't know what to do. My children, the 2 younger ones, were crying and hysterical. Is my daddy dying? What's happening to my daddy? They had never seen their father like this. I was trying to get the 2 older girls to help me. And the advice I was given by the doctor I spoke to was, it's flu-like symptoms, give him 2 paracetamol. The next day, Trevor would recover from the injection, and then the following day, he would have to give himself another injection. So in his head, as he was coming round on the second day, he was already having to think about day 3, another injection. Every other day, another injection. He did not want to have the treatment. He wanted to again give it up. I got very angry. And I told Trevor, we have 4 children. You cannot leave me. You have as much of a responsibility to our 4 children as I have, and you have to take this treatment. People, including Trevor's family, saw a couple at war, EastEnders, and because Trevor wouldn't discuss it with anyone, it was, you'd be better off without her. Trevor, in his head, thought that if he could reset the clock and go back to being single, it would all be hunky-dory. He had it in his head that if he left me and the children, it would all go back, everything would reset itself. Everything would be fine. He had suicidal ideology. He tried to commit suicide because of something else. Thank goodness. Every cloud is a silver lining. We no longer had any guns in the house, because I know that would have been Trevor's first choice. As it was, the land, the farm, is truncated by the railway, and it sounds like something from a bad movie, but that's where Trevor went to. I was working at the time. First form of diversification financially for any farmer, send your wife out to work. So I was working. I came home, I knew something was wrong, and I knew I had to find Trevor. And that's where I found Trevor, on the railway line. And thank goodness the train wasn't running on time, because otherwise Trevor wouldn't be here. But the children had a really hard time. I had a really hard time. We didn't discuss it with his parents. When Trevor was really bad, I took time off work, said I was sick. They put me through disciplinary. I worked for at the time, and if you weren't working, you were costing them money. The girls, 15 and 13, Lucy and Nicola, they took time off school, so it impacted upon their education. And I wrote them notes to say they were ill. That was an issue in terms of their attendance levels. But we were trying to manage and care for Trevor in the way that Trevor wanted, because Trevor didn't want anyone to know. He felt, because he was a farmer, that somehow his dad, who was a workaholic and who had done very, very well in going from one farm to 5 farms, he was letting his mum and his dad down. His dad was very stoic. He took the view that, you know, if your leg or your arm wasn't hanging off you, you were out at 5:30 in the morning to do a day's work. I only ever remember Trevor's father coming to the hospital on one occasion when Trevor had had a road traffic accident which was very nearly fatal. And we were putting a bendy straw into the corner of Trevor's mouth for him to drink water because he could not raise himself up off the bed. He was having to use a bottle because physically I couldn't always get him to the bathroom. And when the girls looked after him, that was an issue. What man? I mean, I said earlier, I married Action Man, and as our son Sam put it, Trevor went from hero to zero in a very, very short time. It was harder for Trevor to cope with his morbidity than his mortality. And that's why I believe he was suicidal. For him, it was better to shuffle off this mortal coil than to live his life the way he was. He psychologically couldn't cope with it, and physically, with having the interferon and the ribavirin, his body was to him disintegrating, his hair was falling out, all of the physical symptoms that he was experiencing, he couldn't get his head round. I went to the Royal and I asked the haematology nurse for help, and I will never forget it. She actually put her hand up and she said, "We can treat Trevor medically, and that's all." I know it is referenced that we were offered help. I do not recall anybody having that conversation with me. The only thing I remember is between the first and the second course of treatment, we were introduced to a social worker. Actually, she lived locally and I knew her. And I, and you'll have to excuse my sarcasm, said, "Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, the baseball cap and the stick of rock. And the Marsdens are still together as a family in spite of you. It was too little, too late." At that time, we had, and I don't know how we did it, I look back on it, and to me, the mid to the beginning of the noughties is a period in my life that was totally surreal. I don't know how we kept all the plates spinning. And added to that, there was then the financial burden. We could have been very well off if, at that stage, Trevor would have sold up the farm. He would never countenance that. That was not on his to-do list. He just could not have coped with that. So financially, we were struggling with trying to keep a farm. And if anybody thinks that land is an asset, it is a burden. It is a responsibility. It doesn't keep you. You have to keep it. We had the financial burden of 4 children
the university,
who were, yes, coming to the stage where they wanted to go on to 3rd level education. I worked in the insurance sector. Cash flow is king. As a self-employed person, if you don't work, money doesn't come in. My salary was keeping the farm, and it wasn't enough to keep the farm. We had financial difficulties. That impacted negatively, and if anyone knows anything about the financial services sector, once you have bad credit or you have judgments against you, you can't work in the financial sector, because that's the first thing they do is they check you out. I could no longer work full-time because I needed to be a carer. So I then had to get jobs which were less money, but less time to have the ability to help Trevor. And
I do.
all of the struggling with everything, it was carnage.
Yeah, one of the things.
Carnage.
One of the things that I seen, obviously, my children were suffering. My wife, obviously, I took it upon myself to sell some of the land off, which, if anybody knows anything about farmers and things, it's one thing you don't do is sell land. My dad was, well, we didn't talk about it for a long time. I'm good with my dad now. I didn't share a lot with my dad. Probably in hindsight I should have. But that I don't know. That was.
And just before we leave it, I would like to also make 2 comments. One is about the household regime. So you live your normal everyday life, all the little things. All your toothbrushes sit in one glass. If you're drinking something and your child asks you, "Daddy, can I have a drink?" you do that. Again, I can only liken it to flicking a switch. All of a sudden, Trevor's toothbrush sat in a separate glass. Trevor wet shaves. We used soap in the house at that stage, and he quite often used the soap for lather. We had changed to liquid soap, because if he got blood in the soap, then what if the kids then washed their hands and they got the blood? So then you think about towels. So Trevor had to use separate towels. And don't take that drink out of your daddy's glass. And our children had to adjust to this. Trevor had to adjust. It was like all of a sudden he was a leper. And that's very, very hard to do, and very, very hard to explain to your 5-year-old. Yesterday you could drink out of daddy's glass, but today you can't. You know, very, very hard. As a person, and this is about me personally, I obviously was tested and knew I did not have hepatitis C. But you read it can be transferred by bodily fluids. Well, without painting too graphic a picture, it was very, very hard to be intimate with Trevor. In my head, I was thinking, he's got this. he obviously had the treatment but didn't clear the virus. So every time we have intercourse, every time I'm intimate with Trevor, I'm putting myself at risk. And that had another impact on our relationship as a couple. And being very honest with Trevor, and I don't think I've articulated this to him ever, it would have been much easier to walk away. I could have made a financial claim on the farm, taken the 4 children, and it wouldn't have been ideal, but it would have been a way out for me. I had Hobson's choice. I knew Trevor would not have survived. And had suicidal ideology. And I had to, even though at the time it wasn't how I felt, I knew for us to survive as a family, I had to stay with Trevor. Because even if I left with the children, if something happened to Trevor, 1, I couldn't have lived with myself, and 2, our 4 children, who absolutely adore their daddy, would never have coped with it. The only person that kept me sane was my friend from school, Laura Neal. And she gave me guidance and helped me when we were isolated. We'd gone to the hospital to talk to the hand. We couldn't go to Trevor's family because that was Trevor's choice. And I did think about that. But then I thought to myself, and everyone is different, and I'm not judging them because I know what it's like to be judged. They couldn't have coped. They would have shot the messenger, and that just would have made things much worse.
You've referred to the fact that the first course of treatment with the horrific side effects you've described did not succeed in clearing the virus.
No.
And it was 2006 before you embarked upon a further course of treatment.
That's correct, yeah.
What, if any, side effects did you experience in that second course of treatment in 2006?
It wasn't much better.
They were similar. It was pegylated interferon with the ribavirin, and with the pegylated interferon, Trevor's cell count dropped dramatically, so they then had to give him Neupogen.
That's correct,
and he was told that because his immune system was weakened as a result of the treatment, that he had to be very, very careful about any kind of infection. It was a roller coaster. What helped significantly was our 4 children were older, much more mature, and truthfully, Trevor wouldn't have got through the second treatment except for the children. At one time, and in our house, everything's discussed over a cup of tea. I remember Trevor saying he couldn't go on with the injections, and Rachel, who's our number 3 daughter, threw her arms round Trevor and said, "You have to, because you have to walk me up the aisle." And that was the sliding door moment for Trevor in relation to making him very determined that he would finish it.
That second course of treatment that started in 2006 did succeed in clearing the virus.
It did, yes.
But Trevor, you say in your statement that you don't feel particularly better or differently. It feels as though you still have it. Is that right?
I may be paranoid, but when the hospital were telling me, that I could get these infections so easily and my levels were bad and come on up to the hospital, and I'm going, what? Why would I go there? Everybody's got an infection there. It'd be better sleeping with the cows. It was not there was a lot of I don't trust a lot of people, and I don't. There's things going on. This sounds maybe weird. I know my body so well with everything I've went through. I can feel things going on that I know when I'm not well. For instance, I know when there's something really badly wrong, and I try and stay out of hospitals, try not to get kicked with a cow, you know, but these things happen, and I can't explain it. But I'm really in touch with myself, and I actually feel quite good at the minute, but you don't know what's going to happen. And it's frightening when every time I come here I've got another infection. It's going to stop coming.
And Trevor, you've had difficulties with your memory.
Yes.
That led to it being suggested that you might have early onset Alzheimer's.
That's correct, yes.
But that's, as I understand it, but please, Louise, Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It's now your understanding that that is not a correct diagnosis.
That's correct, yes.
And you understand it to be more likely that the memory problems that you experience are part of the brain fog that
Yes.
we've heard from others
Yeah.
described associated with hepatitis C and treatment for hepatitis C.
That's correct. When I came here, it was like a jigsaw puzzle falling into place. When everybody was given evidence here and they were having the same effect, it really helped me try and understand that, because I know probably men aren't that good at remembering things anyway, but anytime I went anyway, I had to then phone Louise to see why I was there. I'd be driving up a road and didn't know where I was going. It was really bad at one stage, really bad. That's why they thought it was obviously Alzheimer's.
In terms of follow-up care in relation to your liver,
Yes.
having cleared the virus, you've been told, since the second course of treatment, what, if any, follow-up care or treatment have you received in terms of monitoring the state of your liver and any damage?
When I came here, I got information that you could get a liver scan. What was the name of the scan?
Yes, an ultra.
Ultrascan, yes. So I went for that.
So when you say when you came here, as I understand it, it was when you came to the inquiry hearings.
Yes, that's correct, yes.
This year,
Yeah.
End of April, early May
Correct.
this year.
That's correct.
And you heard evidence from others who talked about follow-up care and fibroscans and ultrasounds. You'd not had any of that before.
No.
And you then went to the hospital
Yes.
and asked, and you were given an ultrasound.
That's correct.
You've not had a fibroscan,
No.
but an ultrasound and told that there was no visible abnormality.
That's correct.
Have you been told if there's going to be any ongoing follow-up care or assessment of your liver?
Not as yet, no.
He did ask about getting an MRI, and he was told there was a very long waiting list.
I just ask about issues relating to stigma. You've talked about how you've kept things private within the Marsden household, but you've also described in your statements how you live in a small community and people did find out about the infection with hepatitis C. What was the effect of that?
Yeah, so,
Well, Trevor found it very difficult. As I've said, he's a very gregarious person, and I suppose for Trevor, who has never lived anywhere else than where he lives in his entire life, felt that people judged him. You know, people that had spoken to him then didn't speak to him. Socially, he was a bit of a pariah. I suppose that's the politest way to put it. Now, in saying that, in the wake of the tribunal, there are people who have spoken to Trevor and expressed empathy that were amongst those that at a time ignored him.
What you said in your statement, the experience you'd had hitherto was many locals treated me differently In my local shop, people would stare at me as though I was on stand in court having committed a heinous crime.
Yeah.
It's remained that way and is just the way people are towards such things where I live. I tried not to let it affect me. I don't row with people about it. Once I went into a shop and the girl serving me asked, "Why don't you do your local shop?" This is how I've got used to being treated.
Yeah, well, I did answer and told her that in the local area that they were so interbred there, it was only the fresh air kept them alive. And she showed me the door. Okay, it maybe wasn't the best answer, but you need to have a sense of humour, and I think that is one of the things that's helped carry me through. That's how I get round the stigma.
You've touched on the impact on your children, and we have statements from each of your 4 children which explain very vividly their perspective and the impact upon them. But is there anything else you would like to say about how you view what effect this has had upon your kids?
Our children have been tried, tested, and they have not been found wanting. We are very, very lucky. They should never have had to experience what they did and see their dad and me as well go through and, see me angry and shouting at Trevor and Trevor shouting at me. All of Trevor's health problems that he experiences today all come from him having been infected with contaminated blood and blood products. And I am just thankful that the Marsdens have survived as a family unit.
And your own health, Louise, has suffered. You speak of anxiety and insomnia in your statement.
Well, I find it I just find it very, very difficult, except for my friend Laura, who, without judging me, has given me unconditional love and support. I probably would be in a very bad way. I feel that I have to stay strong and healthy to care for Trevor. I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but yeah, there are nights when I don't sleep. There's information I don't give to Trevor because I know how it will impact upon him. An example would be Dr. Main's statement. I got it last week. I had perused it, decided,
Yesterday morning.
no, I'll wait until it was yesterday afternoon when I went through the statement with Trevor, because better one sleepless night than maybe 7 or 8 sleepless nights for Trevor. So yes, I have tried to manage things for Trevor. He's much more anxious now than he ever was. You asked him and he didn't really fully answer about the physical problems he has at the minute. He finds he will tire easily. Sometimes foods that he eats, if he has something that had a high level of fat in it, he might have to go and lie down within 15-20 minutes of eating it, because he'll say he feels like somebody has kicked him in the liver.
My liver, if I took cream, I would be in a bad way. I do know what it does affect me now. Well, I'm nearly 60. If you don't catch on now, there's something wrong.
So we have adjusted our lifestyle, and I feel that I help Trevor manage the symptoms and do what we can. Obviously, psychologically, it's very hard because no one truly knows, no matter how long they've been or how well they know someone else, what goes through your head. And for us, I suppose, the sword of Damocles is the variant CJD. We've done the HIV, we've done the Hep C, but who knows?
Well, can I just say that I know what happened in the past was wrong. What I did or tried to do was wrong. I've got a second chance. A lot of people don't get a second chance. but just for the record, I'm not going to buy that land. And what I have in front of me is my wife, and I love her very much. That's all I need.
And our children, and the best things in life aren't things.
Yeah.
Louise, you've, I think, taken on the management of the finances of the household. You've described, both of you in your statement, that the financial situation that you find yourselves in is not a good one. You have work would need to be done to your home, which you are not in a position to fund. You have, from time to time, had dealings with the previous trusts and schemes.
Yes, Caxton.
Yeah, Caxton.
What was your experience, Louise, of making applications to the Caxton?
I actually found the Caxton Fund was reasonably easy to deal with. They were helpful. Very quick in their administration.
Yeah.
My issue would be when it was devolved and transferred over to Northern Ireland. And that is a much more difficult situation. Everything is public money. And I understand that, but I'll give you an example. Some of the windows in the house, it's double glazing, the vacuum in them is damaged, some of them are cracked. And I rang up and I spoke to the young man who administers the fund or does the paperwork in Northern Ireland, and I asked him about getting the double glazing units replaced. And he said, well, we wouldn't fully fund that. So let's use the example of all the units costing £2,000. He said they might look at it favourably and give you £1,000 of that 2,000, but then you would have to find the other £1,000. My argument to him is, well, if I had the other £1,000, I would only be wanting £1,000. So if I apply for it and you granted £1,000, will you let me replace whatever units that will pay for? Or do I have to replace all of them, which means then I have to either borrow the money or secure it from some other means? And he couldn't answer that. So Caxton were very helpful, and we did receive help from them. But I can't say the same about how it's been administered at the moment.
Louise and Trevor, those are the questions I have for you. But before I ask you if you have anything to add, I'm just going to ask Mr. Snowden if there's anything further he wants me to ask.
It'll be over soon. You'll be grand. You will be fine.
There's just one point which Mr. Snowden asks me to raise, and it just takes us back to the records from 1996 that we were looking at. Paul, could we have up, please, 1372008? And could we go to, thank you, you're ahead of me, that's the very document. March 1996, we looked at this earlier. If we just look down the bottom of the page, there was something, the very bottom, there was something we didn't draw attention to. It says GP letter, and there's a tick to suggest that a letter was going to be sent to your GP, to Trevor's GP, following this consultation.
Yes.
Is there any such document as far as you have seen in Trevor's records?
No, I went through all of Trevor's GP records, and when I read on one occasion where his doctor, Dr. Esler, mentioned he had hepatitis C, I then looked retrospective or backwards from that, looking for a letter from the hospital to our GP informing him, and I cannot see, I know that is ticked, but I do not see any letter either in the hospital records or in his GP file informing our GP that Trevor had hepatitis C, so I don't know how that was communicated or when.
So the two inferences might be either that the letter was not sent, contrary to the tick, or that the records are incomplete.
Correct.
Yeah.
Those are all the questions I have for you. Trevor, Louise, is there anything further you would like to say?
Yes, I would, surprisingly enough. You'll just have to bear with me and dispel belief. You asked me about how do I cope with it. And for me, this is my big dream. I want to put all the clinicians that ever treated Trevor into the DeLorean car. And I want to take them back to the future. And come here to me. Just like in the film Erin Brockovich,
Oh, yeah.
I would like them all to roll up their sleeves and say, you're having what he's having, and see if they'd be happy with that. But that's just a pipe dream. Trevor's health, what he experiences now, all of the difficulties flow from having received contaminated blood. For us, the big thing, the sword of Damocles, is the fact that he knows he got products from someone who died of variant CJD. And if you Google that, the prognosis isn't good if you happen to be unfortunate enough for it to manifest itself in you. The second thing I would like to touch on is the protocol for treatment. And I have to emphasise, I am simply speaking in relation to Northern Ireland. Trevor has never been treated at any other haemophilia centre in the United Kingdom. December 1987, Trevor had a road traffic accident. Not his fault. He went into a post and rail fence. A rail came in through the door of the car and went into his head. Fortunately, we live in a very small area, and one of his cousins got to Trevor before the ambulance did, collected me, and we went to the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. Because of a trip we had made, I had Factor 9 in the fridge. I had started to reconstitute that Factor 9 in the car on the way up to the hospital. When we got into the ambulance room, I gave the syringes to the nurses. I started to explain to them how to do it. And I turned round, and there at that stage was the doctor standing on the opposite side of a trolley to me, with Trevor in between. I handed him a syringe and told him to put it into Trevor. And we then, bizarrely, played push me, pull you with the syringe over the top of Trevor's body.
Did I say I was Dan at this stage, by the way?
And eventually, having refused to do it, I screamed at him, for God's sake, put it in him or I will. And a senior nurse who had a compression bandage on Trevor's head very quietly said, I think you should put it into him. When I spoke to the haematology doctor who turned up 3.5 hours later, he said to me, and it wasn't good for me, if you hadn't have had the Factor 9, they wouldn't have infused him until either a doctor who knew him arrived, and he had arrived 3.5 hours after Trevor did, or they had found Trevor's medical records. That took them a day and a half.
Brilliant.
That did not instill me with confidence.
You wonder why I'm sleeping with the cows?
September 2018, and Trevor is travelling from Holland, where he's been with friends. He gets to London for his connecting flight, and he has a bleed in his left foot. He rings. He's advised to make his way into London. He rings me, and I said, Trevor, just get on the flight to Belfast. He's in such pain and discomfort, he can't walk, but he manages, through the help of ground staff, to get onto the plane. The Marsdens kick in. I, again, because of a trip Trevor had made, had factor 9 in the fridge. I reconstituted it. I dispatched it to Belfast City Airport. Our daughter Rachel, who works as a firefighter there, took it airside and met Trevor on the plane. He got into an ambulance which was waiting on the tarmac, and he was taken to the Royal Victoria Hospital.
I said not to tell the kids.
And Trevor knew what had happened to him. Rachel had his letter. That was how she got the medication airside. Had the letter, and she asked the paramedics to put it into him. Rachel has never had the training to do that. They refused. Trevor got to the Royal Victoria Hospital, and they refused. Eventually, a haematology doctor came, and she infused Trevor with the factor 9. His consultant, Dr. Gary Benson, has told us repeatedly the protocol for treatment has to be that Trevor gets his factor 9 as soon as possible to bring his levels up to normal. There has to be a protocol for treatment of haemophiliacs in Northern Ireland. I don't know what exists in mainland GB, but there has to be a protocol, so there is absolutely no delay in Trevor getting his factor 9. you asked Trevor about what has been his treatment since even the tribunal. He had one joint clinic with a hepatologist. They were promised they would all be joint clinics. He had one meeting with a hepatologist. He never saw a liver specialist again. So all Trevor's treatment for hepatitis C has been by the Haemophilia Centre. For me, and I am not as well educated or up in things as I would like to be, or as all of these learned people to my left. My limited understanding of the law in the United Kingdom is it is based on the rights of the individual. Where were Trevor's rights? He didn't sign over his rights to Dr. Main. At the age of 18, he had autonomy under the eyes of the law for himself. Somewhere along the lines, person or persons unknown clearly lost their moral compass. I thought that there were principles that doctors signed up to, whether you term it as the Hippocratic Oath or good practice. Let's not get into semantics. But of the 4 principles, one of them is humanity. Where was the humanity in how Trevor was treated? And their values not to cause further damage and suffering as a result. I would like to throw that question out, in particular to all clinicians. Did they adhere to that? And I know hindsight always has 20/20 vision, but what they did, was it well done? Lastly, I want to thank the tribunal. For us, it has been, certainly for Trevor, it has been very cathartic. It has given Trevor something that he has waited for years, which is validity. And the opportunity to speak openly about things that he just bottled up. He doesn't need, when he talks to anyone else here, to give them the whole backstory or to couch it in a particular way or be conservative with the information. It is just unfortunate that it has taken this long. We wouldn't be here as a family unit without our 4 children, Nicola, Lucy, Rachel and Sam. And lastly, my friend Laura Neal, who counselled me and who helped keep the plate spinning in the air. And it would be very remiss of me not to mention Sammy Wilson. Whatever your politics are, like him or loathe him, he has been a great friend to Trevor. He has supported him, and he has been a friend to the tribunal. We all would not be sitting here without Sammy's friendship with Trevor Marsden. And I can't thank Sammy enough. And lastly, I just want to mention something that Trevor said to me. He had been out, he'd had a meal with Sammy some weeks ago. And Trevor came in.
He doesn't take me out a lot.
And he said, strange thing happened tonight. He said, I had a drink and Sammy asked, could he taste what I was drinking?
Well, it was only cider.
And he said, even though he knows I have all of these things, he drank from my glass.
I was shocked.
And that meant an awful lot. Thank you for your patience.
Sir Brian, also, thank you very much.
In a moment, we'll take a break until 12:15, but first let me thank you for such a clear, detailed, and compellingly frank account. You've, in many ways, laid your souls and lives bare for all to see. And I hope that those who are listening to it here and elsewhere know what courage that must take. I certainly do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quarter past 12.